Hey folks, we will begin in just a minute. We're letting the participants continue to roll in as the numbers are still ticking up. So once that kind of levels off, we'll go ahead and get started. Again, we're just waiting for people to keep joining. We're kind of slowing down now, so we'll probably begin here momentarily. We seem to have kind of leveled off, so I'm going to go ahead and get started while people are still joining. It's cool seeing where everybody's coming from in the chat. So if you want to keep doing that, that's fine. But whenever you have questions for the presenters, please put them in the Q&A feature. So welcome to today's webinar, Why We Need Active People for a Healthy Nation. My name is Alan Beck. I will be the moderator today for these wonderful speakers who have agreed to speak for us on this topic. I represent the Physical Activity Alliance's professional development sector. In my day job, I work at Washington University in St. Louis. Go ahead. Our speakers today are going to be Ken Rose first from the CDC, Jeff Whitfield also from the CDC, and Stephanie Lemon from UMass. They're going to introduce themselves individually. If you want to go to the next slide, I can kind of give a brief intro as to who we are. Speaking of the Physical Activity Alliance. So we're the nation's largest and most inclusive community of physical activity advocates, researchers, academics, practitioners. And we are guided by the Physical Activity Plan, which hopefully we all use in our day-to-day lives. So our purpose is to envision an active and healthy nation where the opportunity for physical activity is easily available in the lives and daily lives of Americans. So for anybody of all ability levels. And we are a nonprofit organization. And then here are some of our representatives from our board overall. Again, so with the Q&A feature, whenever you have questions specifically for the presenters, please put them in the Q&A, not within the chat. I think it's fine to keep putting where you're coming from in the chat. It's kind of cool to see where everybody's at all over the US and beyond. So I will pass it off to Ken Rose to get us started. So thank you all again for joining.
Good afternoon. I just want to let you know that I'm coming here today as a recording, mostly because I don't know what my Wi-Fi connectivity is going to be where I am right now when I answer questions for you later in this webinar. My name is Ken Rose, and I am the Chief of the Physical Activity and Health Branch at the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. And like you, my path to physical activity and health was not straight. It started many years ago as a young adult playing sports, where I learned the lessons of self-efficacy and team leadership, and continued into college, where I rode my bike to work and to school. But then as I grew older and had a family, things just weren't as easy for me to be physically active. And I kind of laid off for about 12 years. And as a young professional at CDC, joining in 1997, I had kids. My daughter had just been born, and I was a current smoker. So I decided to quit smoking. And the same day I quit smoking, I signed up for a training program for a 100-mile bike ride, or a century, as many of you on the phone call will know. And that experience changed my life. It changed it so much. Physical activity made me feel so much better that I integrated a bike ride to work every day, to work and back. And any of you who know Atlanta will know that that is not the safest choice on the face of the earth. And I learned very quickly how hostile our streets are to people walking, jogging, or taking a bike ride to work. And so a few years afterwards, I was working in the policy field and got an opportunity to actually integrate built environment health into my job, starting as the National Center for, as a policy director for the National Center for Environmental Health and Agency for Toxic Substances Disease Registry. And so worked with a broad team of CDC to really start to build the concept of built environment health in ways in which that we can promote physical activity into our daily lives. And so when a chance came for me to join the Physical Activity and Health branch about 8 years ago, I jumped at it. And more recently, I've been honored to have been selected as the branch chief for the Physical Activity and Health program, and also help lead the Active People Healthy Nation national initiative, which is what I am going to talk to you today about. So, next slide. Physical activity, as many of you probably already know, is one of the best things that you can do to improve your health, and that others can do to improve their health. Many people are aware of the long-term benefits of physical activity, as you can see on this slide, including the prevention of heart disease, diabetes, and several cancers. But physical activity also has immediate benefits that can be enjoyed after just a single episode of physical activity or a single bout, including improved sleep, reduced anxiety, and reduced blood pressure. Bottom line, as you all know, physical activity is an incredibly powerful tool to improve health and well-being. Next slide. And recent research confirms this. You may have seen this article that just published a couple months ago. It shows that about 110,000 deaths per year can be prevented if adults increase their physical activity, even by a small amount every day, 10 minutes. And we could see a dramatic reduction in deaths. Next slide, please. And as you can imagine, the health benefits of physical activity can add up to some really considerable healthcare savings. An analysis that our group did a few years ago of healthcare expenditures between 2006 and 2011, we estimated that about 11% of healthcare expenditures among adults, or $117 billion a year, is associated with inadequate physical activity. And so you can imagine over 10 years, that's close to $1 trillion. Next slide, please. So knowing that physical activity is good for you, how much do you actually need? Well, here are the aerobic physical activity guidelines for people to fully recap the health benefits. For adults, the goal is to get a minimum of 150 minutes of moderate aerobic physical activity a week, or about 30 minutes per day, 5 days a week. For kids, the goal is to get at least an hour a day, and then you can see the other recommendations here. Next slide, please. But unfortunately, the vast majority of people really don't get the level of physical activity that they need. Only 1 in 4 adults and 1 in 6 high school students fully meets physical activity guidelines. And I should also say that about 31 million Americans, older adults, don't get any physical activity beyond what they need for daily living. So they are completely inactive. Next slide, please. Earlier this year, we released the adult physical inactivity maps. So this means, like I just said, people who don't do any physical activity. These are the adult physical inactivity prevalence maps. They contain an overall state map and 5 maps showing state data by race, ethnicity. The maps show that more than 1 in 5 adults is inactive in all but 4 states. State and territory level estimates of physical inactivity range from around 17% of people in Colorado to roughly 49% in Puerto Rico. There are also differences by race and ethnicity. And this year, we added, for the first time, 2 additional races, Asian adults and non-Hispanic American Indian and Alaska Native adults. It should be noted that lack of access to safe and convenient places to be physically active may contribute to these observed racial and ethnic disparities. Next slide. So given the tremendous benefits of physical activity and the millions of people who are inactive or insufficiently active in this country, we, CDC, launched Active People, Healthy Nation in January of 2020 to help 27 million Americans become more physically active by 2027. Next slide. Active People, Healthy Nation supports a set of 7 evidence-based strategies for increasing physical activity. All of these strategies are based on evidence from the Community Preventive Services Task Force and should integrate equity and inclusion as part of their implementation process. We call these, in short, the strategies that work for implementing Active People, Healthy Nation. Next slide. Our vision is that regular physical activity is the norm. And everyone, regardless of race, socioeconomic status, disability status, and geographic location, has a safe and convenient opportunity to be active. Building a national movement that creates a culture of physical activity is the only way that we can give all people in this country these life-changing benefits. Next slide. In order to increase physical activity and increase opportunities for physical activity, we need to all work together. Public health can't do this work alone. All of the strategies that you just saw benefit from and or require partnerships across multiple sectors to be effective. And I should say here, you can see a link to a resource that you can use to understand how to talk to different sectors, to engage different sectors, to even integrate particular content to particular audiences that you may be speaking to. Next slide. By way of example, I'd like to share how our division, the Division of Nutrition, Physical Activity, and Obesity, is building the capacity of national, state, and local partners to implement one of these strategies, activity-friendly routes to everyday destinations. And we know that the strategy is important and it has significant population power to change physical activity. So if you think about how this works, so you have to join 2 things. You have to join an activity-friendly route with an everyday destination. So essentially, you're connecting land use and transportation interventions with environmental design interventions. And what it means then is, I have to have a safe place to walk to a particular destination. I talked earlier about walking to the store or taking a bike ride to the park. The important thing is that this is a combination of interventions that makes the strategy powerful. You have to work on policy systems and environmental changes that can create longer changes in your community. And so, for example, you can create a protected bike path to a local commercial district, or you can make sure that you have sidewalks, safe sidewalks, that have safe crossings that connect the neighborhood to the local library, or you can have a safe way to walk to a transit stop that might take you downtown. Next slide. So our division supports work to increase physical activity through walking in support of Step It Up, the Surgeon General's call to action to promote walking in walkable communities, which recognizes that walking and rolling are the most approachable forms of physical activity. Walking is also the most common type of physical activity people report doing. For example, data from the National Health Interview Survey showed that 3 out of 4 US adults who meet federal physical activity guidelines reported walking for transportation or leisure. But, next slide. People don't have access to safe streets. If you look at this slide, it shows that only 1 in 7 people have access to both streets that make walking safe and easy and safe and convenient access to locations that support walking, such as walking trails, parks, and recreation facilities. And I should say that these results are pretty much roughly consistent across race, ethnicity. Next slide. In data analysis that we've supported with partners, like this particular example, Smart Growth America, show that these perceptions are all too real. In a report published by Smart Growth America using these data called Dangerous by Design, they showed that people who are walking are much more likely to die than die the faster cars are traveling. So the car traveling at 30 miles per hour is much more likely to kill someone than traveling at 20 miles an hour. Or here, of course, you can see in this graphic, 40 miles an hour. So our strategy to create activity-friendly routes to everyday destinations improves these safety conditions and helps to protect human life today by preventing traffic-related injuries and deaths. It also promotes quality of life and prevents disease by providing access to physical activity opportunities. Next slide. Our division funds over 60 recipients in 3 key programs in states and communities to promote this strategy, activity-friendly routes to everyday destinations. Through the State Physical Activity and Nutrition Program and health departments who work in communities in their states. Through the High Obesity Program, which works through land-grant universities in predominantly rural counties with 40% more of obesity. And in local areas through the Racial and Ethnic Approaches Community Health Program to explicitly create community coalitions of people affected by health disparities to address them through these physical activity interventions. Some examples of work conducted by these partners include citywide comprehensive plans that support walking, adding more sidewalks and multi-use paths, adopting and implementing complete streets policies, and improving park access. Next slide. We've been working to build capacity to implement activity-friendly routes to everyday destinations with partners and others. And I just want to cite here, these are an example of a variety of technical reports that we've supported in the field. Reports that really have helped move the debate here. For example, if you look at the Making Strides report from Safe Routes Partnership, data in that report was used in the last transportation reauthorization. You probably have all heard about all the money that's going to walking and biking in this administration. And data from that report was used to help justify an investment in high-need communities. So we have seen some real impact from some of these investments. Next slide, please. And we've been working with a wide range of national partners to amplify the national movement. Activity-friendly routes to everyday destinations is just one thing that we have to do to create a culture of physical activity in this country. It is necessary to have a place to walk, but it is insufficient. It's not enough. And we have been working with a number of partners to help build this movement for active people of the nation, recognizing that we have to implement all the strategies for increasing physical activity that are in that signpost I talked about earlier today, prioritizing inclusion and equity. So these are just some of the partners that have worked with us, and many of them on their on their own time to amplify active people of the nation. And I just want to highlight the great leadership from the Physical Activity Alliance from the very beginning in this effort. They have been an incredible partner every step of the way. And I want to thank all of you who have been involved with that effort to build active people. And would also love it if you would really amplify the movement yourself by reposting social media and just looking for ways to build awareness of this effort in your own communities. For example, you can work with local decision makers to adopt proclamations that recognize the strategies for increasing physical activity in your community. Next slide. And lastly, as I just said, we really want you to join the movement and keep in touch. So right now, I hope you will take your phone out and scan this QR code And as I said, follow and repost social media messages supporting Active People Healthy Nation. Signing up also gives you access to our monthly newsletter, which contains local success stories, best practices, compelling communications materials, funding opportunities, and the latest science and data. So I just want to really thank you for giving me your time today. And now I will pass it over to Jeff Whitfield, who also works in our group, to talk more about the science related to physical activity. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Ken. And let's see here. I'm gonna wait for the slides to come up. Just one second. All right. Great. Well, thanks, Ken. Thanks for that introduction. And like Ken, I was going to start off by just giving a brief rundown on how I came to be at the CDC and also end up as team lead at the Epidemiology and Surveillance team here at the Physical Activity and Health branch. So my journey kind of started as a master's student in exercise physiology at UT Austin. And after that master's degree, I worked in a clinical setting in cardiac rehab for about 3 years, just doing hands-on patient care. And towards the end of that 3-year period, I became more interested in research. And I really had this, I don't know, kind of an aha moment at one point that I was really interested in the research that created the foundation of our clinical practice guidelines that we followed. And so it was around that time that there was a PhD program started in my hometown. So I'm from Austin, Texas originally. And actually Bill Cole, who is active in the Physical Activity Alliance, started a PhD program at the Austin regional campus of the UT School of Public Health. So it was very great timing and a great location to be in, being able to stay at home and do a PhD. I finished that. So that was from 2010 to 2013. After that, in 2013, my family and I moved to Atlanta for a postdoctoral fellowship called the Epidemic Intelligence Service. And if anyone's interested in that, my email address will be on the last slide. I'm happy to chat about it. I talk to dozens of people every year about EIS and other fellowship opportunities. But spent 2 years as a postdoc at CDC from 2013 to 2015, and then stayed on as a staff epidemiologist after that. And I've been there ever since. So we're coming up on about 9 years now. And it was about a year ago that I applied for and was fortunate enough to be selected as the team lead for epidemiology and surveillance. So yeah, if anyone's interested in talking about federal careers in science, I'm always happy to chat. So Ken just reviewed the health and other benefits of physical activity and mentioned that there's room to improve physical activity participation in this country. So what we're going to do now is take a closer look at how physical activity participation is changing in the US. And if anyone's interested in a deeper dive, I would refer you to our recent supplement in the Journal of Physical Activity and Health that covers a lot of this ground. Next slide, please. So let's start with leisure time physical activity among adults. The National Health Interview Survey consistently assessed aerobic and muscle strengthening physical activity from 1998 to 2018. And during this time, the proportion that reported meeting both the aerobic guideline, remember that's 150 minutes per week of aerobic activity, and the muscle strengthening guideline, so that's 2 times per week hitting major muscle groups, that proportion increased from 14% in 1998 to 24% in 2018. And very importantly, these increases were present in all subgroups that we looked at. So by education, age, race, ethnicity, et cetera. Next slide, please. Now, despite lots of increases across the board, there are some important differences that remain. And what you see on the screen here is a deeper dive into the proportion of adults who meet just the aerobic component of the physical activity guidelines. And we've stratified it by both income and race ethnicity. And there's a few important takeaways here. I think the first thing is that regardless of income level, non-Hispanic white adults are more likely to report meeting the guideline than are non-Hispanic Black or Hispanic adults. And this means that, next slide, please. Blacks and Hispanics at high income levels, so on the far right side of the screen, have similar activity levels to whites at moderate income levels. They're in the middle of the screen. Next slide, please. And it also means that Black and Hispanic adults at moderate income levels in the middle of the screen have similar activity levels to white adults at low income levels. And these analyses also showed that some of these differences by race, ethnicity, and income were narrowing over time, significantly so. But important work clearly remains to be done. And there's likely many reasons for these persistent differences, but as Ken was mentioning, unequal access to safe and convenient places for physical activity is likely a key factor. We know, for example, from NHIS in 2015, that Black and Hispanic adults are about twice as likely to report crime as a barrier to safe walking than are white adults. Next slide, please. Now, keep in mind that the previous couple slides focused on physical activity in leisure time, but as we all know, the physical activity occurs in other contexts or domains, including during work time, during household upkeep, and during transportation. And the National Health and Nutrition Examination Survey has asked adults about physical activity in these different domains since about 2007. And overall, and after some ups and downs, the proportion of adults who meet just the aerobic guideline in these different domains increased slightly from about 64% of adults to about 68% of adults in 2017, 2018. And these data also suggest that differences by race, ethnicity have narrowed over time, kind of like the similar situation that we saw in the previous slides. The other thing I would mention is that physical activity during transportation is pretty rare in the United States, according to these data, and it's an potentially an untapped resource for physical activity participation. All right, next slide, please. We also have some limited information about physical activity among youth. So the Youth Risk Behavior Survey asks high school students about their past week physical activities, both aerobic and muscle strengthening. And the proportion of high school students that meet both of those guidelines has been decreasing for both boys and girls. And the decreases were particularly evident in 2019, pre-pandemic, which is concerning. And it kind of ties back to what Ken was saying. It's concerning for the future because it likely has ramifications for future health status and healthcare expenditures. Next slide, please. All right, so we're going to do a full stop and shift gears for a second. What I've just walked through was a very brief summary of what we would call maybe traditional physical activity surveillance or monitoring. And we call it traditional because the information comes from purposefully sampled US residents that are answering questionnaires that are specifically designed to monitor health. We're also working right now at the Physical Activity and Health Branch to modernize physical activity measurement by repurposing non-traditional sources of activity data. So let's give you a quick peek about what we're working on. Next slide, please. So we have a vision for this work that incorporates three areas. The first is behaviors, so how people move through communities, and primarily walking and bicycling. The second is environments, primarily built environments and components that support physical activities like sidewalks, bike lanes, and different destinations. And then policies that support those environments, so things like complete streets policies or zoning ordinances. And we imagine in the future having the ability to layer these measures together to improve public health. So imagine working at a city or a county and being able to identify which parts of a city have lots of residents, which parts also have a lot of different businesses that might provide different destinations to walk to, but few people walking. And then being able to layer on top of that, being able to identify that that same area where people are not walking lacks sidewalks. So it could be a very powerful tool to prioritize areas for immediate action. And we'd like to expand these capabilities across the country. To do so, we've partnered with the MITRE organization to chart a path forward for these three areas. So on the next three slides, I'm just going to give you a quick peek about where we are in each of these three areas. So for behaviors, the pandemic really shined a light on the use of community mobility data for public health. And these data are primarily sourced from smartphone apps that use location-based services. I would also add that they're currently being used in the COVID response. So the image on the left side of the screen is actually from CDC's COVID data tracker and shows changes in community mobility at different periods through the pandemic. Now we're exploring the possibility of repurposing these anonymized data for identifying walking and biking trips in communities. And most importantly, we're trying to get these measures at smaller geographic scales than what is currently possible. And so you can see a selection of the different data sources that we're exploring currently there on the right side of the screen. Next slide, please. For the built environment, we're interested in using images, both roadway images and satellite images, to identify pedestrian and bicycle infrastructure. And we've been interested in this for some time. Over the past 2 to 3 years, though, the question has really shifted from, is this possible? Yes, it clearly is possible, to how do we do this at scale for the nation? And also, what is permissible? Which leads me to some key takeaways that you can see on the screen here. And I would call your attention to what I think is one very important takeaway, and that is that at some point, we likely need this to be some kind of a public-private partnership, because the private industry partners that own these images really can set the terms of use and decide on what's permissible. Next slide, please. So for the policy realm, just like traditional survey-based epidemiology research on behaviors in built environments, traditional legal epidemiology is a very powerful and valuable resource, but it's also very resource intensive. So we're trying to work with these partners to identify ways to streamline this process. And so some really interesting lines of work include just finding relevant legal documents in legal libraries and law repositories. And then also using techniques like natural language processing to identify relevant sentences within policies and perhaps even interpret some of those sentences and codify the meaning using machine learning. The question really here in the policy area is, where can we gain the greatest efficiencies in this process? Because we know we're probably not ever going to have just a button that we can press that will automate policy surveillance. And it's a very complicated area. And then next slide, please. I'm going to finish with just 2 quick slides on some recent and upcoming research that I think is important to update the field on. So next slide. What you see on the screen here is recognition, and this might have actually, this might not be news to everyone. We have been advertising this fairly heavily over the last couple of weeks, but CDC recently added physical inactivity to the list of conditions that predispose people to severe illness from COVID-19. So most people will know that early in the pandemic, obesity was identified as a risk factor for severe COVID-19. Well, CDC established a process within the COVID response of conducting literature reviews to identify other conditions that predispose people to severe illness from COVID. And physical inactivity was found to be a significant risk factor. So there's a slew of materials available on the web, everything from some general public phrasing and how to convey this message, all the way down to the science brief that actually details the literature review that was behind this finding. So I would encourage you to check that out if you're interested. Next slide. And then finally, I would just offer a teaser. We have a paper that's currently under review that looks at the National Health and Nutrition Examination Survey from 2015 to 2020. And is, to our knowledge, the first paper that combines measurements of body mass index and reported physical activity to try to ascertain the proportion of military eligible aged adults in the United States that both meet Department of Defense BMI standards and report high levels of physical activity, activity levels that are commensurate with meeting the high guideline in the physical activity guidelines, but also that's in line with some Army recommendations for preparing for basic training. And so I would keep your eyes out for that. I think it's going to be an interesting paper and perhaps really be informative about the future of physical activity and potential impacts on national security. And with that, I'll thank you for your time. My email address is on the next slide, and I'm happy to answer questions after the fact as well. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. I'm up next. My name is Stephanie Lemon. I'm at the University of Massachusetts Medical School in Worcester, Massachusetts. I'm very pleased to be here today. My goal today is to talk to you about the CDC's Physical Activity Policy Research and Evaluation Network. I'll follow Jeff and Ken's lead and tell you a little bit about my background to get us started and how I got here. So I started off as an undergraduate at UMass Amherst, very interested in health psychology. And applying the discipline of psychology to understanding health behaviors. It wasn't until my senior year in college that I took my first public health class when I started to learn about how systems and structures and context really can influence health and perpetuate health disparities. And I really fell in love with the field of public health, as well as with research. And so I have dedicated my career to thinking about how we conduct research that is very practical and usable, that can inform public health in a way that is meaningful and addresses health equities. And I think PAPRIN is one example of how we can accomplish that. So I'm very excited to tell you all about PAPRIN. So what is PAPRIN? We are a thematic research network that is funded by the CDC, specifically through the branch that Ken leads, Physical Activity and Health, which is in the Division of Nutrition, Physical Activity, and Obesity. And we are affiliated with the CDC's Prevention Research Centers, which are research centers funded to academic institutions across the country that are charged with conducting highly collaborative, community-engaged research that address real-world local problems. PAPRIN is a key research partner of Active People Healthy Nation, and it is grounded specifically in the Community Preventive Services Task Force recommendations that call for land use and transportation strategies for supporting physical activity. So very much aligned with what Ken talked about earlier around focusing on routes to everyday destinations and active living on the daily basis. PAPRIN strives to advance the evidence base and put research into practice through collaboration across multiple sectors that have a shared vision for achieving active communities. So why do we need PAPRIN? Jeff just told us why we need PAPRIN. Physical activity remains low across the United States and disparities persist. This is an ongoing, really important public health epidemic, which I don't need to tell this crowd about, but we know the problem exists. We also know a little bit about what some of the evidence-based strategies to promote physical activity are. We know that they are complex, multifactorial, and we know that the larger, community context really matters in the ability to promote physical activity and to be physically active. However, many gaps still exist, both in the evidence-based, in practice, and particularly in putting evidence into practice. And this is where PAPRIN tries to come in. Our goal is to conduct applied research that fills some of these gaps in a way that is cross-sectoral, practical, and usable. So our network is, we're co-located at the University of Massachusetts Medical School in Worcester, and at the University of Illinois at Chicago, Jamie Shrieky is my co-lead on this. We have essentially a volunteer network of over 700 members. Our members include researchers, urban and transportation planners, engineers, policymakers from all levels, government staff, folks interested in green space, advocates, public health professionals, et cetera. Who all come together around this common commitment to transform best research and policies into meaningful practice to promote physical activity. This gives you a little bit of a sense of who's in PAPRIN. This was our very recent annual evaluation survey. Only about half of our members, a little less than half of our members, are actually researchers. This is something that we're hoping actually to increase representation from non-research folks, but we have folks coming from government advocacy groups. We really enjoy working with students and trainees. And then we have folks coming from public health, social sciences, exercise science, planning engineering, and a lot of other disciplines who share this vision that we have. And so what do we do in PAPRIN? Membership is free, anybody can join. We conduct a series of network-wide activities where our goal is really to build capacity, to increase knowledge, and to bring cutting-edge ideas to our members. We conduct what we call PAPRIN Grand Rounds every other month on the fourth Wednesday of the month. Our goal is to feature high-profile, innovative speakers who cover cutting-edge topics and to engage our members in really meaningful dialogue with the goal of identifying what the research to practice gaps are. On the right-hand side, you can see just two of our more recent presentations. We had Daniel Rodriguez from the Department of City and Regional Planning at UC Berkeley talk about urban health reform in Latin America. And we had a really wonderful panel of representatives from different federal agencies talking about Build Back Better and opportunities for physical activity. And so we're actually planning on doing something similar in the next academic year as well, because it was so well received. We also have on alternating months a series of network meetings. Our goal here is to bring the network together and to provide policy and advocacy updates from different partners who work with Active People Healthy Nation, as well as other groups, as well as to provide brief presentations on resources and opportunities that come available, and to provide opportunities for research sharing across the network. On the bottom right, you can see some of our more recent talks. We had David Hopkins from CDC talk to us about the new recommendation related to parks, trails, and greenways. And we had Russ Pate give us an update on the National Physical Activity Plan. And this is just a sampling of the type of talks that we have. We also hear routinely from many of the active living Healthy Nation partners talk about some of the policy updates that they're working on. And you can see the list here of some of the organizations that routinely participate. One of PAPRN's goals is to keep our members informed of what's going on in the field. In the middle, you'll see we have our newsletter called the PAPRN Post. This comes out every month. This is a really wonderful resource that comprises recent research studies, job opportunities, just about everything that you can think of that is relevant to our members. We also have a website and a blog. Please check us out at www.paprn.org. You can also sign up to be a member there if you're interested, and you can follow us on social media as well. We use our social media presence again to try to keep our members updated and to share the work that we do. The other part of PAPRN are work groups. We have a series of 6 different work groups that are aligned with both the community guide recommendations, as well as with a couple of the sectors within the physical activity plan. The focus of the work groups is to conduct projects that focus on priority topic areas related to the built environment and physical activity. The work groups conduct small projects that address identified research to practice gaps. Often these gaps are identified by the CDC and or some of our partners. It provides opportunities for participation in scientific manuscripts and presentations, as well as in the creation of practice-based products and tools, which is one of the charges that we give to each of our work groups. And it's really a nice opportunity to provide network and exchange information with experts from across multiple sectors. Our work groups usually meet monthly, and they also often include really wonderful guest speakers of their own. And so the work groups that we have focus, number one, on equity and resilience. We have one on parks and green space, one on rural active living, school wellness, transportation policy and planning, and worksite wellness. And the ends to the right of each of those just tell you the number of individuals who are signed up to be part of the work group. I would like to caution that signing up for a work group doesn't mean that you're interested in necessarily conducting a project. A lot of people just like to get the information or to show up when there's a talk that they're interested in. Work group membership is always open, and it's never too late to join if anybody on the call is interested. This is just to give you an example of one of our projects. Our PAPRN Transportation Policy and Planning Work Group is conducting a research project focused on sidewalk financing and maintenance. This is being led by a member of my team here at UMass, as well as representatives from America Walks and the other institutions that are listed here. And why are we doing this project? Well, really, it was a partner identified gap that we really know very little about local sidewalk financing and maintenance mechanisms, and how this affects, network quality and health status. And so we're conducting really a first study here to document municipal policy mechanisms and to identify promising practices. And this project is, it's a fairly straightforward small project, but it's a way to launch an entirely new line of research, which is identified as having, very little evidence base for right now. And each of the work groups usually has about 3 or 4 different projects going on at once. And again, the projects are usually identified by, folks from the CDC, from some of the speakers we hear from, as well as from some of our partners. This just very briefly, we work very closely with Ken and his group, and you can see my partners in crime, Jamie and Karen, on here as well. We're really fortunate to be part of such a really great group. We are guided by an external advisory committee, which is all practitioner focused. In the interest of time, I won't go through their names. And just because they do so much work, I really just wanted to let you know that our work group chairs are all people who volunteer their time and energy to creating these really wonderful groups that do really important work. And so with that, if you are interested in learning more about PAPRN, joining means that you get the monthly newsletter, and then the rest is up to you. You can participate as you'd like. We'd love to have you engaged. As I mentioned, we're really committed to increasing our representation from individuals who are practitioners and advocates. And with that, I'm going to turn it back to Ellen.
Thank you to all of our presenters. Now it's time to put you on the hot seat for all the questions. So my first question will be to Ken. Ken, how do you / the CDC plan to promote Active People Healthy Nation beyond this webinar here?
Well, first of all, let me check and make sure you can hear me. Awesome, thank you. So I do want to just say that, part of working with Physical Activity Alliance is building that network. And this is a kickoff webinar for Active People Healthy Nation. And we're really excited about working with the Physical Activity Alliance moving forward, and PAPRN, as Stephanie mentioned, and many other currently funded partners like those I mentioned in our slides. And then we have a number of formally funded folks that we have worked with over time that we are also trying to integrate as we can into our efforts and make sure that they are aware of all the great work. I also want to note that we have social media handles that, to be honest, aren't the best in the face of the earth from a government perspective, but we are the US federal government, so take that for what it's worth. Our handles, which Caitlin can post in the chat, are DNPAO, which is our Twitter handle. That's the Division of Nutrition, Physical Activity, and Obesity. So again, D as in dog, N as in Nancy, and there it is. Awesome. And then the second one for our Facebook group or our Facebook page is Eat Well, Be Active. So that's our Facebook page. So I encourage folks, depending on what, so far that's what we have. You'll know what we don't have based on all the social media that I haven't mentioned. So anyway, that's what we currently have. And then I also just want to note that we are about to launch a consumer-facing campaign. Those of you who have been around for many years will remember the VERB campaign that when I was a young career professional at CDC, pretty much the same time I told the story about not smoking, we had a campaign called VERB, which targeted tweens. And some people on this Zoom call may remember that campaign themselves as a focus population. But we are launching a consumer-facing campaign based on a lot of the science we've learned back then, as well as more recent science that has been updated, called Moving Matters. And again, that's Moving Matters in the next month. And while it's nowhere near the same scale as VERB, it is built on, and it's much different in the sense that it's focused on social media. But it's a campaign that will increase the awareness of the benefits of physical activity, build self-efficacy to be more physically active, and prompt more physical activity among adults who are insufficiently active or inactive. The next meeting that we have together will focus and showcase this campaign in more detail, but it is a campaign that is specifically focused on particular racial demographic groups that have less activity. So I'll leave it there for now.
Thank you. Next question I'll send to Jeff. Has racial and residential segregation been considered regarding the inability to access physical activity? For example, they said air pollution is an exposure that overwhelmingly impacts Black communities as well as Hispanic communities.
Yeah, it's an excellent question. I think I would. I would say that it's not yet an area that we have looked specifically at on our team. I think there is literature there starting to emerge in that area. I would add that we have good information on historically redlined areas, but what we're missing is the ability to layer on top of that the micro scale, like street level measures of built environment features that support physical activity. And this is really the problem that we're trying to overcome in our data modernization efforts. One of the core questions is where are sidewalks in this country? It's not something that we can answer on a grand scale. We have pockets of information at different cities about where sidewalks are, but at the national level, we don't have a coordinated way to measure that. And sidewalks is just one example. You can say the same thing about crosswalks or bike lanes or walkable destinations. And so that's why this data modernization in my mind is so incredibly important, because it opens up an entire world of analyses that are currently just not possible because of a lack of consistent data across the country. So I definitely hear the concern, and it's something that we're actively moving towards right now.
Great, thank you. To maybe Stephanie and Ken, how was Active People, Healthy Nation and PAPRN incorporating and addressing the unique needs and health disparities of people with physical disabilities and being physically active?
I'll defer to Stephanie. Yeah, why don't you start,
Yeah.
Stephanie?
Yeah, that's a terrific question. And I think my honest answer is, at least from PAPRN's perspective, not well enough. We featured several speakers, or a couple of speakers, I guess, who were experts in that area. And it's certainly an interest within our health equity and resilience work group, but it's an area where we can do better. And we know that there are a lot of needs and a lot of gaps.
Yeah, I mean, I would certainly echo that. There are a lot of needs and a lot of gaps. It is a fundamental inequity that we did recognize in the Surgeon General's call to action to promote walking and walkable communities. It is weaved throughout those priorities, but it is also there's also a lot more that could be done from our perspective. And as we know, anything that we do to meet those needs are going to help everyone, and so it is important. Universal access is a super important thing to be advocating for in the built environment for so many different reasons.
Thank you. We'll go back to Jeff. It says most Americans are not meeting the physical activity guidelines for resistance training. However, there seems to not have been any mention of programs specifically geared towards promoting and increasing resistance training. What is the CDC doing to increase resistance training among Americans?
Well, it's certainly true that a lot of the strategies that we focus on, predominantly providing activity-friendly routes to everyday destinations, is really focused on increasing aerobic activity, primarily walking and biking for transportation. So yeah, definitely acknowledge that there is some the strategies that work well for a federal agency trying to operate throughout the country tend to lend themselves towards these population level approaches that really are going to be most effective for aerobic continuous physical activity. I would say that I think a couple of things are working against us for resistance training. Certainly there's an equipment component there, and it's not required. I mean, we know that you can do resistance training with just your body, but I think there are some resources from the Department of Health and Human Services that can help here as well. So I would reference the Move Your Way campaign and some different ways to incorporate strength training into daily activities.
I would just
anything to add there? That might be a good question for active people as well.
Yeah, I'll just add to that I didn't have it in my presentation. I probably should have, but I'm sure you'll hear it later in other presentations. But the community guide just recently released updated guidance on park infrastructure and then additional interventions. And so certainly the types of things you can do in parks to provide access to resistance training would qualify as an additional intervention that would improve the importance of park access. And then I guess I would just say that from our perspective, there's not enough money, generally speaking, or let me rephrase it. I mean, I think that the resources that are out there to support physical activity, generally speaking, are insufficient. And even when we just talk about one component of the strategies for increasing physical activity, if you look at all of those strategies, there are several there that would support resistance training. But we have only a certain amount of resources to support this work. So we have chosen in our work to focus on activity-friendly routes to everyday destinations because of the power of that recommendation more broadly, and specific to aerobic physical activity, because those things are necessary, but they're insufficient, and we need more than that. And that's why I started my presentation talking about the need for a culture of physical activity across this nation, recognizing that we need the resources to support that culture. And to get to, I think, those resistance needs, we need that culture across the spectrum. I'll tell you a story. So I used to take transit home from work when we all were going to the office on a regular basis. And while I was waiting for the connection train, I would do push-ups and sort of body weight resistance exercises in the station. And people looked at me like I was crazy. And we have got to change the culture so that does not look crazy to people. So I'll leave it there.
Thank you. We'll do one more quick question. A lot of good questions, actually, they're hard to choose. Does the CDC or PAPRIN plan to have improved access to physical activity resources, such as working with insurance companies to reimburse health coaches, exercise physiologists for their service, maybe even like gym memberships too?
I'll start that one. So we have been working with the Physical Activity Alliance, as I said earlier today. And part of that work is starting down the road of, not to get too deep into the technical details here, but starting down that road. It's a long road, but I think we all recognize the importance of community clinical connections to support physical activity. And we are working with Physical Activity Alliance to help support the first steps of that process.
Great, thank you. Well, I'm gonna be cognizant of everybody's time, so we're pretty much at time now. So thank you to all the presenters. I appreciate everything you put out there and all the great questions. So there are still many more questions that we could have spent probably another hour just asking those. There will be a recording of this presentation available after down the road. Thank you to our attendees for joining. So please check out the chat where you can find a link to sign up for the physical activity newsletter to stay engaged. For example, if you remember in the first slide pointed out, this is the first in a series of presentations related to Physical Activity Alliance's year of Active People, Healthy Nation. So be on the lookout for the next presentation. So thank you all so much. I appreciate it very, very much. You all take care and be active.